Hi, I'm between a militiaman and a captain here at Dey Mansion for our next segment. We're going to get an insight into what it was like to be a soldier of the, not necessarily the Brits, you were Scottish, right?
Scottish, within the service of the British Army.
Okay. This is Captain Grillo, sometimes called
Captain Cricket, the anglicized version of the name Grillo.
Okay, Grillo in Italian comes across as cricket. Okay,
Yes.
First of all, as you were describing to someone else, describe your uniform.
Right, well, because I'm in the service of the British Crown, the most common color being worn by British soldiers is red. Now, there's different shades of red within the British Army. A regular soldier is going to be wearing a little bit darker red called madder red. It's almost like a brick red. Officers like myself are wearing this bright scarlet, which is made out of a very super fine type of English wool. Would have been very expensive. It actually still looks expensive today in the modern 21st century. But the coat I have on is completely hand sewn the way it would have been done back then. There's 42 buttons on each regimental coat, whether you're a private or an officer. Officers wear gold-plated buttons. That's why I have gold buttons and gold lace. So this would have been real gold wire around the buttonholes.
And the 42?
42 stands for the 42nd most senior regiment in the British Army. Hence 42nd Royal Highland Regiment, or today commonly known as the Black Watch.
Now, you guys would not have been friends in the 1700s.
Not at all. Not at all. No.
Why? What did he represent?
Basically, burning down buildings, raping women, trashing entire populations and farms.
You guys were nasty.
Well, pretty much, I wouldn't say it was so much that way. The people really...
See, they're still fighting.
Absolutely. You know, if a soldier's caught doing these things, they're flogged or they're hung. They are severely punished.
Okay, good.
Although it doesn't mean that you don't have sergeants turning a blind eye occasionally. But the people we're really worried about are the mercenaries that we hired through the Principality of Hesse and Kassel. You commonly know them as Hessians. Well, they could tend to get out of hand. They could go a little bit too far, ransack people's homes, maybe burn them down. Some of them might have been accused of going a little bit too far with the female population here. I know there was a couple of instances at the time of August 1776, when we're getting ready to attack Long Island, commonly known as the Battle of Brooklyn, where it was written in one of the local newspapers that a young maiden could not go pluck a flower from our garden without being accosted by a soldier.
Wow. War is hell.
Yes.
Indeed. Now, you have a great medal right here. It looks like a medal.
Yes.
What does that represent? I guess
That tells you I'm an officer on duty. It's called a Gorge. It's kind of like a badge. This is the last vestiges of medieval armor that soldiers wore in the 18th century. Okay. The medieval gorgets were a lot bigger, and of course the originals were made so you're being attacked by somebody with a large broadsword during the Middle Ages. It's going to be a little hard for them to try to lop off your head.
Speaking of sword, can you demonstrate yours?
Yeah, this is a typical Scottish basket hilt sword. The common soldier would have been carrying them. They would have been privately acquired by the common soldier. Officers have them too. Some officers have real fancy ones. They might have gold-plated hilts on them, or the basket on there, or they might even be brass.
Thank you. And your tartan. Talk about that.
I am wearing 9 yards of government tartan. Now, there's only
and it's hot today.
Yes. There's only one style of tartan that was legal to wear in Scotland. It was the one that they came up with by the British government, and it's 9 yards. It's pretty much laid out on the ground. You have to hand pleat it every morning when it's put on. The only thing that holds this on my body is a wide belt. So there's a belt around my waist that it's pulled up on the back, flapped over my shoulder, and pinned
Right.
by the upper leg.
I thought priests had a lot of vestments. You beat us by a long shot.
Yeah. Yeah, this is pretty heavy. I'm used to it. It actually can be warm in the wintertime. Back in January, I was at an 18th century tavern. It was probably about 10 degrees out that evening. It was okay, unless you get a breeze coming underneath, then it's going to be obvious. You know, it's all right. Occasionally you get a breeze. The thing that could be cumbersome is all this folded wool.
Folded wool in the back.
Like this. Occasionally I have gotten a heat rash from the wool around my waist as well.
How did you get involved with the reenactments?
This goes all the way back to 1992. Actually, it even goes back further. When I was 7 years old, I went to Valley Forge. And at Valley Forge with the Cub Scouts, we're playing around in the rammed earth readouts, pretending we're Continental soldiers. I wanted to be George Washington. My friend says, no, you can't be George Washington because my real name is George. So you're Paul Revere. Not realizing 7 years old, well, Paul Revere was never in the militia, let alone the Continental Army, but I played along with it. As I got older, when I was in my late teens, I got involved with being interested in the British Empire, British Victorian uniforms, and in my early 20s, I was really into that full steam ahead. Then back in 1992, I see this large battle reenactment taking place in Monmouth County. And when I was at the Battle of Monmouth, I see a whole entire regiment wearing bear skins, high gaiters, and remember when I was a child, that's my ideal. I want that. I want to be a grenadier or a fusilier. There's a whole regiment of fusiliers, by the way. They used to have, at strength, at big events, 68 men. I joined them, stayed with them for about 20 years, but in the meantime, those early years, we would hang out in camp underneath the fly of the 42nd Black Watch. I've known Colonel Bob Small for over 24 years at this point. His granddaughters are fully grown. They have their own children. They used to watch my daughter. My daughter's now 20 years old, so Daddy could go out and play because my wife was a nurse at night at the time. So I was like, okay, she's working every other weekend. I cannot go to a reenactment unless I take the child in tow. What am I going to do? So they took pity on me. They would watch the child. They would feed us. And then after a while, as time went on, spending my 20 years with the Royal Welsh, I decided, well, you know what? I've been there, done that, done it all. I was with the big full-scale regiments. Those days of seeing 68 guys from one group is long since gone. I know what I'm going to do, Bob. Guess what? I'll join you guys. So I officially joined them about 4 or 5 years ago. I waited for a while till I actually totally turned over from the 23rd. And then he got into a predicament because our colonel just turned 81 years old. Well, it's hard for him to be a field commander. First he goes, I want you to be our sergeant. I'm like, okay, I could do that. I know the manual of arms. And then from sergeant it turned out to be, I need you to be an officer. I said, don't make me a high rank. So he made me the rank of captain. I don't want to go any higher than that. This is fine. I'm happy. I'm comfortable with this. But it's a learning process because I don't know much about being an officer. They just throw you out there in the field. All right, command the men, move them there. I'm like, oh, well, how do I do that? Well, I have an RSM, Regimental Sergeant Major. He knows it all. He knows the manual of arms. Sergeant Major, help me out here. Now, I really had a hard time last week. I was at this event in Frankenmuth, Michigan. And we have another company of 42nd out there. And the senior captain, he decides, well, I want you in charge of the event this week. I'm like, what? But I was able to pull it off. And by the time Sunday morning came, Sunday afternoon, I started getting more comfortable reading out the commands. I started to get a little bit of camera shy. But
you're not camera shy now.
There's a reason why. Because I'm not surrounded by other peers of men who know what they're doing commanding in the field. Okay. Because my main job is I work at a historic house in the Bronx. It's the Van Cortlandt House Museum. Sure. I've been their museum educator for the last 17 years. So I'm used to being around public every single day dressed 18th century. But the other thing I've been doing since 1998, and I started at the Purdy House in White Plains, different historic areas, through national parks in the New York area, they hired me to be General George Washington. So there are times I have an audience of 1,500 people.
So eventually
that doesn't bother me. But when I really have to command in the field, surrounded by other people, knowing wait a second, he did something wrong, talking behind my back or a snickering or whatever, there's a big difference between that. And I'm a historic person. I know pretty much as I could know at this point, reading all these books about trying to turn myself into somebody like General Washington. That's the easy part. Being a real commander on the field, moving men around, this cannon's going off, you're getting confused. Well, I don't know how to get the men from here to there. I know basic commands that maybe a corporal or sergeant knows. So I'm trying to build on top of that.
Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
Fascinating
Sure.
History and
Yep.
interest. See, now you guys can lease people.
Yes.
Oh, here's a friendship
Quite right.
being
Absolutely.
born as we speak between the revolutionaries and the Hessians. God bless you. Let me hear from you. This has been Father Louis Scurti with a reenactment of a Hessian soldier in Scottish employ, ultimately of the King of England, George, and of course, our little faithful militiaman, Bob. Thank you for joining us. Let me hear from you. Father Louis Scurti at hotmail.com.